It'll make you laugh. It'll upset you. But most importantly, it'll make you think. This is Dogma Debate with David Smalley.
Welcome to Dogma Debate. I'm your host, David Smalley. I want to send a special thank you to the folks listening out on iHeartRadio, on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, and all the wonderful podcast places. But also a special thank you to our radio listeners out in Grand Rapids, Michigan on WPRR 1680 AM and 95.3 FM, and in Allegan County, Michigan on 90.1 FM, and the nice people over in Pontiac, Illinois, listening on WPJC 88.3. FM. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't listened to episode number 259 of this show on the podcast feed, which probably didn't make it out to those radio stations because it was only about 18 minutes long, rare, I know, for David Smalley to do anything under 4 hours. I've heard your complaints. But I strongly recommend you stop listening to this and go listen to episode 259, which I'm going to be referencing throughout this program. And also go check out the Pharyngula blog by P.Z. Myers. So here is a tiny backstory of what happened. I wrote a blog on Patheos, which is basically the written version of what I said on episode 259. So you can either go to blog.dogmadebate.com and read my Patheos article, or tune into episode 259 of the Dogma Debate podcast. Same difference. There's only a couple of little minor nuance changes. That's basically what I said. It's called What's Killing the Atheist Movement. Well, I had something passionate to say about that. And my buddy P.Z. Myers got wind of that. I believe he read the blog version of it on Patheos, and he wrote a rebuttal to it. And what he wrote is an article titled, What If the Atheist Movement Needs to Die? And he starts it off like this. He says, I'm sure glad David Smalley and I are friends and fellow atheists, because he begins a post titled, What's Killing the Atheist Movement, by saying this. And he quotes me saying, remember when our friends could be wrong? I do. Lots of my friends were idiots growing up. Hell, I was that idiot a few times. But we stuck together, we worked through our issues, and we grew together. PZ continues, so he won't mind at all when I say that the post is a string of obnoxious atheist cliches and that he's dead wrong about everything. The good news is, PZ's right. I don't mind at all. In fact, I don't mind so much that I've invited PC to join me right now. Please join me in welcoming PZ Myers to Dogma Debate. Hello, PZ.
Well, hello there.
Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate this, and thanks for writing your opinion piece. I do enjoy that type of feedback. I do enjoy these types of discussions. So I'm happy to have you, sir.
Yeah, well, the fact that you enjoyed my criticisms is something else that suggests you're all wrong in your argument. Okay. It's always nice when my critics defeat themselves in the first minute of the debate.
Hey, just because I enjoyed the criticism doesn't mean I agree with them. In fact, it was Aristotle who said it is the mark of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. So I can entertain your ideas and they can actually entertain me. That doesn't mean I agree with you, PZ.
Oh, okay. Well, right. Let's hash out these disagreements then.
Let's do. The first thing I'll say is, I have your post here. I printed it out because, it's 1998. And I printed it out and made some highlights here. And the first thing that jumps out at me is your comment that you say we're supposed to keep our disagreements private. And you're kind of quoting me and then saying, sort of reinterpreting what I said there. I did say, our fights were private conversations. I encouraged people to contact one another privately to work out issues. And throughout the blog, you mentioned, this is an attempt to silence people, that basically asserting that you think I don't want any disagreement to be public and I want everything to be secretive. And I'm just curious why you got that out of what I wrote.
Because I've heard this 1,000 times before. As I mentioned in my post, nobody ever does that. Nobody ever calls me up and says, hey, I would like to disagree with you on this subject, and can we have a conversation before I excoriate you on my blog or whatever? It simply doesn't happen. And I'm just curious, has it ever happened to you? Has anybody ever called you up and said, I would like to discuss this before I rip you a new one?
Well, let me put it this way. I about a year ago, I witnessed something, and both guys are public, and this happened publicly, so I'll share it now. Justin Schieber had read something, or not read something, but saw something somewhere of someone quoting Pete Boghossian, and just started ripping into Pete on a Facebook post. And I know both of these guys. I know that both of them are really smart. I know both of them have their differences, and I don't agree with both of them on a lot of stuff, but I saw where they were both coming from. And so I reached out to Justin in a private message. Instead of commenting on his public post trying to defend Pete, I sent him a private message, and I said, hey, at first I had the same issues with what Pete said, but have you actually read the book? And he said, well, no, I didn't read it. I said, so you're missing some context. The statement alone is wrong, but are you interested in talking to Pete about it? Now, he was being pretty insulting in his post, and Pete had gotten wind of it and was being a little bit insulting back. And so Justin agreed to read the book, and he said, yeah, if Pete would like to talk to me, I'll talk to him. So I reached out to Pete, and I said, hey, Justin, as it turns out, Justin saw someone else quote you. He didn't have the whole story. He's interested in reading your book. Would you talk to him? And they connected privately over Facebook Messenger, ended up having a phone call, and worked everything out. And now they're not enemies. They don't agree on everything, especially social issues. Pete tends to be a little bit more conservative sometimes, and of course Justin's very liberal. But overall, we avoided a disastrous name-calling Trump fest by having a private conversation. And that's all I'm really encouraging here.
Okay, so you're just kind of leaving your issues vague then. So you've written this whole post where you make this sort of generic criticism of people doing bloggy sorts of things, and yet you've got in your head some very specific instance.
Well, no, not necessarily. Look, that specific instance wasn't even in my head when I wrote this piece. There were other issues going on. As a matter of fact, when I wrote this, and I released episode 259 of Dogma Debate, I heard from so many people through email, Facebook. They were filling out the form on the website. Everyone thought they knew the exact situation I was talking about because these situations are like cookie cutter. They happen down in San Antonio. They happen in Maryland. They happen in L.A. They happen in groups who are breaking up in Riverside and up in Northern California. They happen all over the place. So people message me and go, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and here's my side of the story, and I've never heard of that side of the story. The whole point is, PZ, when you go after someone publicly, and I know you said in one of your comments here that whoever is trying to suggest that we do it privately, that person tends to be terrified of being eviscerated or publicly eviscerated. And
that's right.
And that's really a hit on me because I'm suggesting it, and I'm not afraid of anyone publicly going after me. The issue is, if I disagree with something you've written, and I publicly blast you, and then on top of that I make insults about your character, and I insult you, well, even if you understand my points and go, oh, he's got a fair criticism of my argument, because it's been done publicly, now there's ego involved. Now there's, oh, you pushed me. Well, it was an accident. It doesn't matter. Now I look like I have to defend myself, and we have to fight to the death until someone gets blocked or banished from the next conference. And that's the type of stuff I'm trying to avoid. So if we do it privately, people are much more able to say, you're right, I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have done that. And our egos aren't so bad and elevated when there's not an audience.
But one of the problems with what you're saying here is there's an underlying assumption. And that is, like in your anecdote, that there's been a misunderstanding, that the two people are not connecting on the real issues, and they've made some mistaken assumption about what the other person said. And that's not always true.
I agree
with you. In fact, it's often not true that there are real divisions within the atheist movement. And when we pretend that it's simply a matter of differences in civility or that we really misunderstand the amazing atheist, for instance. What we're doing is trying to blur significant differences and pretend they don't exist. And I'm not interested in doing that.
Yeah, I would never want to do
Yes, if
that.
you've got an example where I've made a mistake and I've said that somebody believes something that they really don't do, then yes, you're right. That would be a useful place where somebody can step in and say, wait a minute, you got that wrong. And I'd listen to that. But most of the cases that are troubling people are genuine. They're not cases of mistaken identity.
Well, I think they began that way, and that's my point. I agree with you, and again, your blog seemed to sort of insinuate that I don't want anything to ever be called out publicly, but I actually even said in my post and on the show, I said that doesn't mean when I do call you out that I deserve for you to make fun of my appearance or my weight or something that I struggle with. And I see that happening a lot. People go right for the jugular and start making fun of each other and name-calling, and it gets really petty. But it starts off, it tends to start off with a basic disagreement. And what I'm encouraging people to do, PZ, is reach out to that individual before you go on the attack publicly and disown them and call them a maniac and an idiot and a loser. Reach out to them first to see what's driving their misinformation or what's driving their rage. What's going on there? And then if you're unable, and I even said this as well in my blog, if you're unable to find common ground, parting ways with that person is perfectly fine. I don't mind that. It's this pissing match back and forth. Like when I read your piece, I could have very easily written another one or taken to Facebook and criticized you for things and attacked you, and I just find that so trivial. I would much rather talk about the things we agree on, talk about the things we disagree on, and move on. Now, you're right. There are major differences within our movement. But at the end of the day, if we attack each other and we bring all this hate against each other and we make fun of each other's appearance and just disown each other constantly, these gatherings like Reason Rally or, a Secular Coalition for America Lobby Day, where we need people to get together and lobby U.S. Congress on issues of separation of church and state or sex education or science-based curriculum, these groups are going to get smaller and smaller. Well, let me see the list of who's going, because if PZ's there, I'm not going to go. Or let me see who's going to be there, because if Pete Boghossian's going to show up, screw that guy. And then you end up with 14 people with protest signs, and now you're a little fringe group that nobody's paying attention to. That's the issue. I'm not saying shut up for the greater good of the movement. I'm saying work it out in a more civil manner. But you explicitly say in your article the words "fuck civility." So tell me why that's the case with you.
Because as I explained, this is a silencing tactic. That so often what happens is you can make a substantive argument against somebody. You can go right for the core of what they're saying. You can quote them at length and discuss what they're saying, and somebody will come along and say, well, this is rude. I think you should not say this sort of thing. Or they will say something like you just did. Well, you shouldn't be criticizing this person because we need them and their pals to help us legislate something. And I just don't believe in that. That there are many issues more important to me than simply separation of church and state that involve, for instance, the treatment of women, racism, all these sorts of things that I think are primary. And of course, my atheism informs my arguments against those things. And to tell me that, well, you're being kind of rude to this guy who's a world-class asshole as far as it comes to women, for instance, I'm just going to say, well, I don't care. Why should I want to be an ally with a person like that?
Well, the person may be reacting in a way that makes them appear to be a world-class
Okay, but
asshole.
now you're doing it again. You're burying the differences to make a claim that it's simply a superficial, discussion of civility. And I'm saying no, that there are actually very, very deep, strong differences that I'm not going to bury in order to be polite to them.
I understand. What I'm saying is, on the surface, what you see as someone being an asshole, it may be an inappropriate reaction to something. It may not be the way PZ would have reacted, and it definitely isn't the way David Smalley would have reacted. But if that person could receive a phone call to say, hey, look, I really want to stand with you in this movement, but I can't really stand by you if these are your views. So what's really driving the stuff that you're saying? And in a private one-on-one conversation, the person doesn't feel defensive. They don't feel like their ego's being challenged. They don't feel like they have a need to put on a show for any of their followers. And so they may, in a one-on-one peaceful conversation, say, yeah, I know that was out of line. I was mad about this and this and this. I probably shouldn't have reacted that way, and I really want to apologize to that person, but I don't want to eat crow in public. I'm so embarrassed by it. Well, how about we do a private three-way phone call, and the two of you talk it out? And then, guess what? The bond is not broken. And so I'm not saying to silence anyone. I'm just saying we escalate from 0 to 100 so quickly, and we ruin relationships. We throw people away because our friends seem so numerous on social media, and we act like we don't need each other at all. Now, you're right. We don't need a group of assholes. I agree with you. But we've all had moments where we appear to be assholes, and then we admit later that we've made mistakes. And so all I'm saying is, instead of publicly eviscerating that individual, when you see that type of deplorable behavior, a direct private interaction with them to find out why they're being that way could resolve the issue before you go insane on them on social media. I want you to understand.
You've just done it again.
What are you talking about?
Over the differences to say that we're going from 0 to 100 over trivia, and I'm saying no, that we're not.
But I said in my post, PZ, and the show, that if you try to talk to this individual and you're unable to reason with them, they absolutely are this asshole you're talking about, then part ways with them. Call them out publicly and say, these are the types of views I can't stand behind. But, posting pictures, making fun of someone's weight, calling them names and this pissing match back and forth, it's just unnecessary, and it's pity. And the one thing, and I've said this multiple times, if you're involved in boat sales and you go to boat expos, or you're a professor at a college and you're in this mixture of all these different personalities, or you're in you're a doctor and nurse medical field and you go to all these conferences with doctors, or you're an attorney and a paralegal, every individual group has these types of internal issues. They have people who think they are better than the others. They have people who think this is how law should be practiced, or this is how medicine should be practiced, and if you don't do it my way, you're an idiot. Oh, yeah, you want to call me an idiot? Well, you're an asshole. And this thing just gets out of hand. What you're talking about here is a human problem. It's not an atheist problem. And the one thing you would think we could get behind and get over is this ego thing, not being able to say that we're wrong. Every skeptic I've ever talked to goes, I love it when I'm wrong. I love being proven wrong. That's the scientific way. But this culture of shaming anyone who makes a mistake, or if you post something that appears to me to be anti-feminist, instead of me clarifying with you and talking with you about it to see if you actually hold the view I think you hold, I'm just going to do a Facebook post about you, blasting you and making fun of your hair color and your eyes and your freckles. I mean, we should be, as atheists, as self-proclaimed skeptics, we should be above that. We shouldn't just go for the jugular and attack people. I'm not saying to, keep bonds with people who you absolutely disagree with. That's not what I'm saying. But keeping the bond with someone and publicly eviscerating them are two different things, and I don't think that amount of division helps us. Does that make sense?
No, it does not. Because you keep doing this thing where you treat this as people exploding over minuscule differences. That it's just, this person just made a mistake, and if you talk to them, they would clarify it. Many times I'm saying this is not the case. That if it's, for instance, if it's simply that they made one statement, that's all I know about them, then you could make this argument. But if I've gone and looked at their record, if I've read what they've tweeted and what they've written on blog posts and articles, if I've looked at their YouTube channel and I see this consistent pattern of assholishness, then why should I have to call them to check? You keep saying you're anti-feminist, for instance. Are you really? Do you really mean that? You've said it only 100 times, and you've cussed out feminists, and you've said these horrible things about feminists. And I'll note that I don't call people fat, but what often happens is the anti-feminists call women fat as a way of getting at them. And at that point, there's no need for me to get into an unpleasant, distasteful conversation on the phone with somebody I've already known enough about to tell that they're not somebody I want to talk to.
Okay, that's a fair point. That is absolutely. I don't necessarily disagree with that, PZ. I think
yes. So I would agree with you if it's a one-off thing where you just saw some weird thing somebody said and you wrote 10,000 words chewing them out. Yeah, but that's a rare circumstance. That doesn't happen all that often.
But it's interesting that you brought up the anti-feminist remarks, because something similar to that has happened to me before, to where I've seen someone saying something, someone who was fairly new to the whole idea of the atheist community, and I noticed them saying really hurtful, mean things that were anti-feminist. And I reached out to them individually, and I saw several posts. I reached out to them individually, and I talked to them, and I asked questions. I used the Socratic method that I would with any Christian in my studio, and I said, what is it that you don't like about feminists? And every word and it was actually a woman, every word out of her mouth was, they think women should be treated better than men. They think women should have privileges over men. And everything that I heard from her was actually a misrepresentation of what feminism is. And through talking with her and saying, maybe what you're fighting against is someone who is abusing the title feminism and misrepresenting it. And a feminist would be against that as well. So maybe you're not against feminists, maybe you're against people who are abusing the term. And that little bit of education helped change their mind, and they stopped posting that way. Now think about it if I had done the other thing. If I had seen 2 or 3 posts and said, you know what? Tagged them in a Facebook post and said, I'm done with this person. She's an idiot. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a self-hating woman, and I can't stand people like that. She would not have been open to criticism at that point. She would have been, David Smalley's a jackass. And it would have been a David Smalley hate fest for about 3 days, and then we would have blocked each other, and we'd never talk to each other again. And that's not the case today. She's still involved. She's more educated. She's more informed. And that's what I'm talking about. People can be wrong, but a lot of times they're wrong over misunderstandings, not because they're just horrible people. I mean, these people have people in their lives that love them. They have kids. They have family members. They have moms. They have sick and dying relatives that they go take care of. I mean, these aren't monsters we're talking about. They're just people with wrong ideas. And wrong ideas can be corrected with information.
But who's saying this? I mean, who's saying that they're monsters? Because this is what I hear over and over again, is that here's this that you're just blowing up minor issues, that you're calling them monsters, that you're disowning human beings, and that's simply not happening. What it requires, for instance, for me to kick somebody out is persistent harassment and efforts to abuse. It's not like I'm just sort of sitting here casually telling my mob of followers, you must disown this person. In fact, I don't think I've ever used those words.
Okay.
It makes it very difficult to deal with your arguments when I'm seeing that this is, in many ways it's equivalent to the Republican crusade against voter fraud. Yeah, we shouldn't have voter fraud. It's a bad thing, but it hardly ever happens.
Well, and I think, too, a lot of times when I write something like this or I put something out like this, people will read it and then say, "Oh, I disagree with him because the atheist movement I interact with on a regular basis isn't like that. So I'm gonna shift gears and fight against everything David Smalley said." When in fact, the situations you may have been directly involved in don't apply to this necessarily. I've witnessed.
Yeah,
a few.
but likewise, the situations you're discussing don't really apply to anything I'm talking about either.
Well, but you specifically wrote your blog about me being wrong about literally everything I said, and I think a lot of what you did was reword things that I said and really set up some straw men for me. But I'll let you address that when we come back on the other side of the break, because I want to give you plenty of time to do that. Several of the things I've said, and I've seen people in some comments, I try to make a habit to not read the comments, but some of the things I've said have seemingly been completely taken out of context. But I'll let you address this whenever we come back. More Dogma Debate with Peasy Myers in just a moment.
Download Dogma Debate with no commercials by signing up at login.dogmadebate.com.
Tax trouble can be terrifying, but it shouldn't be life-ending. Don't let your tax problems paralyze you. Call Tom Tax Lawyer at 844-4TOM-TAX to schedule a no-obligation 20-minute phone consultation. Put your tax problems in the past where they belong. Tom Tax Lawyer handles most types of tax controversies, including business and personal tax problems. If you are being audited, threatened with criminal tax charges, or owe taxes you cannot pay, call 844-4TOM-TAX or visit TomTaxLawyer.com. You don't need to face the IRS or DRS alone. Call 844-TOM-TAX or visit TomTaxLawyer.com. Attorney Thomas S. Groth of Connecticut law firm Glusgall Ramos Groth LLP is responsible for this advertisement.
Here's an excerpt from God and the Folly of Faith by Dr. Vic Stenger.
Faith is a folly. It requires belief in a world beyond the senses, with no basis in evidence for such a world, and no reason to believe in it other than the vain hope that something else is out there. While a false belief may be comforting or even temporarily useful, it is a dubious guide to life or for the foundation of a successful society. While not all believers have an uncompromising faith, and many recognize the power and value of science, we will see that an influential minority of American Christians see materialist science as an enemy that needs to be renewed so that God is restored to his rightful place in the scheme of things.
Find this audiobook and many more at atheistaudiobooks.com. The facts you won't hear in church.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Krauss, and I'm looking around the room, and I don't see anybody. So I must be the fourth listener to Dogma Debate.
It's a beautiful picture from the Hubble Space Telescope of a distant galaxy, far, far away and long, long ago. And there's a whole galaxy. It's about 1 billion light years away. We're looking at it as it looked 1 billion years ago. So many of those stars no longer exist. And here's an object that's just as bright as the whole center of the galaxy. You'd think it's a star that's near in our galaxy that just got caught in the picture frame. It's not. It's a star on the edge of that galaxy that has exploded. And exploding stars shine with a brightness of 10 billion stars. They're the brightest fireworks in the universe, supernovae. And because it is the most poetic thing I know about the universe, the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway.
If you've been missing Dogma Debate, man, it sucks to be you.
Free your mind.
You're listening to Dogma Debate.
Hi, my name is Penn Gillette. I'm of Penn and Teller, and I am the fourth listener.
Welcome back to Dogma Debate. Before the break, and I want to let you know, anybody can go to login.dogmadebate.com. I believe we're 98% from our membership goals. Sign up there. You get all behind-the-scenes content. You get unedited shows. You download the full shows without commercial breaks. And even streaming video inside the studio whenever that's available. So there's also some other benefits like a private podcast I'm going to be doing for members only and all kinds of fun stuff. So check that out at login.dogmadebate.com. Now, PZ, I said before the break that I feel like a lot of people, including your post, did a lot of straw manning. And I don't want to just be vague about that and throw it out there. I want to be very specific. So I've made a couple of notes here as to some things I felt were done that way. The first one is you say, I have standards in my friends. I don't mindlessly stick with them. Where in my piece do you believe I said to mindlessly stick with your friends and to not have standards when it comes to who you associate with?
I said that because that's what I believe. I didn't say that you'd said otherwise. Although, of course, what I see in your post is a lot of attempts to whitewash differences. So
now hold on. Now, whitewash or come to an understanding to make absolute certain we disagree on something, and that it's not a pissing match over minor details. Because that when I talk about talking stuff out, PZ, listen please. When I talk,
I'm listening, but I'm getting a little frustrated because
I understand
you did it again.
I understand. When I talk about
where you pretend these are little differences, and I'm talking about significant differences.
Right, but talking with each other can determine whether or not it is a small difference or a significant difference that is worth removing that person from your life. And that's what I'm stressing, that we investigate and confirm before we publicly eviscerate. That's what I'm getting at. You say, I have standards in my friends. I don't mindlessly stick with them. It sounded to me like you're insinuating that I was saying the opposite. Was that not the case?
Are you insinuating that I don't research things before I make my accusations?
No. What I'm saying is a lot of
people. But that's what you just said.
I said a lot of people don't, and those were the issues I'm talking about.
And so you're saying that this does not apply specifically to me. So why are you assuming I'm saying this specifically about you?
Well, because you responded to my blog by saying I have standards in my friends. I don't mindlessly stick with them. And you did that in a response to something I wrote. And I would never suggest such a thing. I would never say mindlessly stick with your friends and have no standards. And
well, that's good.
Because in the article, though, I even said, if you can't come to an agreement and after investigating, after talking about it, you're unable to come to terms with this, then parting ways with this person is perfectly fine. I said that in the piece, so I'll just mark that one out.
And I would have no problem at all with that. I mean, that's what I do, is check into these things.
But I wrote that in my article.
Block somebody on Twitter, for instance, without first looking to see what else they've said. Maybe I've misunderstood them. Maybe they're being sarcastic. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what they said.
Okay, then
so
we're not that far
look
off.
a little deeper and you find out.
Right.
And it doesn't require that I get into a phone conversation with this person.
Yeah, I mean, if they have, honestly, if it's been going on for a year and a half and they have a clear track record of their stance, I understand. I'm not going to pick up. There are several people in this movement I wouldn't pick up the phone and call because it's very clear where they stand on certain things. I get that. Those aren't the people I'm talking about here. You said,
then who are we talking about?
Well, that doesn't matter. that doesn't matter, and I'm intentionally being vague about it because
I know that's the problem.
I don't think it's a problem. No, that's not the problem.
You've accused me of straw man accusations against you, but that's my criticism of your post, that it's largely a collection of straw arguments. And one thing I get really annoyed with is discussions that end up with both sides saying, you didn't really understand me, that you've created a straw man of my position.
Well, I think
the
very first
I would
one,
say, you've done that. You could argue that I've done that. And then what we end up doing is getting nowhere.
Well, but we've just made progress because we've just determined that we agree on some
things. Yes.
Yeah, on this one thing where you said I have standards.
Never been a question.
You said I have standards in my friends. I don't mindlessly stick with them. You wrote that in a post in opposition to what I'm saying, and it appeared to me that you were strawmanning the argument, and we just worked that out. We both agree with the statement, I have standards in my friends, I don't mindlessly stick with them. So right here in this very conversation, we've made progress over a misunderstanding. So this is working, PZ. This whole talking to each other works. The next thing I want to bring up, it says here, then there is our disagreement is so petty that you should back down for the good of the movement approach.
Uh-huh.
When did I say you should back down for the good of the movement?
You have argued that one of the reasons we need to have these discussions and resolve these differences in some private way is so that we can make progress on these issues that we do hold in common.
Yeah, what about that as backing down? I'm encouraging conversation. I'm not encouraging anyone to back down.
The problem is, what are the important issues? What you have is an implicit understanding of what the important issues are. And you are saying that the fact that I may differ very strongly with somebody on a feminist issue or a racist issue or whatever is something that I should quietly resolve in the background so we can do this other really important work for the godless movement.
I never said quiet down, PZ, and that's what I'm talking about. I never said quiet down. I said talk to each other individually. I'm encouraging debate. I'm encouraging rigorous, fierce debate if you want. But when it's done in a public forum, on a blog, on Facebook, on Twitter, then the egos rise and people start disowning each other because of that disagreement. When more than likely a private conversation would result in a couple of apologies, misunderstandings fixed, and the strengthening and bonding of the atheist community.
You just did it again. I'm just surprised. It's not sinking in at all. What I'm saying is that no, it would not. It would not lead to me saying, oh, well, we can get along anyway. Or the other person saying likewise. What I'm saying is that there are really strong differences.
Okay, let me give you an example. I will give you one specific example, and I'm not going to mention names. But the recent post that the recent tweet that Ellen sent out of a picture of her on Usain Bolt's back as he's running and smiling, and she said this is how she's going to run her errands from now on. Now, when I immediately saw that, I thought, oh, that's funny because he's really fast and she's complimenting his talents. And that's all I thought of it. And then I heard someone else who is an activist in the Black Lives Matter movement, who's a friend of mine, said, well, it looks a little different to me because I know that, whites actually used to ride slaves 200 years ago, and that's highly offensive to me. And I was like, well, do you think Ellen meant it that way? No, probably not. She didn't know any better, but, I understand. And that was our conversation. However, I saw other people on Facebook going, Ellen is a racist bigot. I can't believe she did this. And then someone else responded with, oh yeah, if you think that's racist, you're a fucking idiot. And then someone else goes, well, if you can't see how it's racist, you need to do some serious self-reflection, implying that the person who called that person an idiot is now broken inside and needs to do self-reflection and needs counseling and all sorts of other insults. What I'm saying is not silence, not silencing dissent, not backing down from your argument, but to do it how me and my friend did, who had different opinions of it, but talked about it and could see other sides and go, yeah, I get where you're coming from, and here's a little more information. And then when I heard that information about the riding the slaves, I went, wow, yeah, I could totally see how people could be upset by it, but, I don't think Ellen meant it that way. Usain Bolt retweeted it. This wasn't too much of a serious thing for them. We're all fighting over something that ultimately, it doesn't make you racist if you think that's funny. And that's my whole issue, this whole dichotomy of if you say X, then you're automatically Y. I'm going to stick you in a category, block you, ban you, and make fun of you for life. And I find that to be so petty. And the way me and my friend dealt with it, we talked about it, and it was over. I didn't go online, make a post about it, and then he comes up and makes fun of me and blasts me for being a racist because I didn't find something offensive that he found offensive. Right? But so many people do that. And within minutes, people are blocked and banned on Twitter and refusing to go to conferences together. That doesn't mean one is racist and one isn't. Although racism is a giant issue, more than likely it's a misunderstanding of points. And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, so first thing, do you happen to have Ellen's phone number?
I do not.
So you haven't called her to discuss this little matter of
right. And
unintentional racism?
Right. And I haven't...
How do you reach people like that?
Well, some people you can't reach. And I'm not talking about you having an issue with Bill Maher or someone that we can't just pick up the phone and call. I'm more talking about those of us that are in the trenches and activism. When someone that you consider an ally does something that you think is stupid, rather than posting that they're a racist moron on your Facebook page, talk with them and find out what's going on. That's really what I'm saying, PZ.
And then what?
Well, if they turn out to be a racist moron, you stop associating with that individual. But that still doesn't mean you need to berate them on Facebook and beat them into the ground.
Except I listened to your story, and here's the problem. You learned nothing.
What do you mean I learned nothing?
What you did is you smoothed over with a friend, but you still are making this argument, well, Ellen didn't really intend to be racist, but intent doesn't solve things. That she was effectively racist with that little photograph.
Well, now you said a few minutes ago.
You may say it was funny. Okay, she may have been unconscious of her unthinking racism, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still problematic.
I understand.
And it's got to be addressed.
I understand.
And you don't address it by calling somebody up and saying, well, is this okay with you? Oh, then it's okay with me. We're done. It doesn't change anything.
Well, you said that I didn't learn anything, and that's actually false, because I did learn how people view it as racist because they had information that I didn't, which was that slaves were actually ridden by whites, and that
now
picture,
that you have that information, have you decided that, well, yeah, actually that was kind of racist?
Well, I think you and I disagree that intent doesn't matter, because I think it does. I think that if you said a minute ago that you do research and you look into that person's history and you look into what they're what they've been in the past. And when we look at Ellen's history, we don't see racism and hatred and bigotry. We see pro-LGBT, we see comedy, we see a good person overall.